gracious welcome. I want to thank you all here today for having me. I want to thank Dan and Helen for welcoming me, Dr. Schmidt for picking me up and giving me a ride here, and Linda for thinking of the fact that I could probably contribute to the discussion that you all have on nights like these, and for the ride that she'll be giving me back. So my name is Angel Sanchez. As Cindy mentioned, I grew up in the inner cities of Miami. Now, I heard there was a promo in the bulletin. How many read it? Yeah, that's what I figured. So everybody knows the beginning and the end of the story. So I just say hi, the talk is over. We were laughing about that when Cindy told me about it. I thought, you know what? They already know the end of the story. What else is there to talk about? But I'm more mindful than that. I know that if we read Genesis and Revelations, we still yet not have arrived at the gospel, right? We need to read the story inside of it to be able to understand the impact of God's love and how He comes to us. And so with that, I wanted to share what happened in between me going to prison and me being here today as a fifth orator in the country. And so to talk about that, I'll begin with my childhood in Miami. I grew up in a broken home, and by the time I was 12, I was surrounded by drugs, crimes, and violence. And that eventually led to my involvement in gangs, a certain subculture that understood what would be abnormal to be normal, violence, drugs, defending one's honor, etc. By the time I was 14, I was tried as an adult for a shooting, a gang-related shooting, and I was confronted with a choice of either doing 7 years in the juvenile system. At that time, I didn't understand it meant me staying until to the age of 21, or being tried as an adult. And I will share with you all some insights about that reality. Juveniles, particularly in at-risk and communities, we don't view being tried as an adult as a deterrent. That is not something that we worry about. That is not a calculation that goes into the decisions of a teenager. I'm sure many of you can vouch for that, and you could reflect back to your teenage decisions and the calculations that went into it. And so since it is not a true deterrent, what is the deterrent factor? And I would tell you that the only deterrence is the violence that happens once you get tried as an adult in the juvenile floor of the adult jail. It takes violence to another level. Abuse, sexual abuse just for the purposes of humiliation, being there, having your shoes taken, etc. However, if you happen to have friends there, you don't feel as afraid to go there anymore. Right? If we have some people from the streets and we welcome in here, initially they'll be a little reserved. But if they have friends in here already, they won't feel as reserved. Right? Now, that same psychology applies. And so for me, I already had a lot of friends that were already being tried as adults. So there was no fear of that. So if the choice is 7 years in the adult system, in the juvenile system, or going to the adult side, you can send me to the adult side. I don't know what that's going to lead to in terms of legal process, but send me over there. But there was a hinging, motivating factor. A few months before that, about 6 months before that, I was sent on a Scare Straight type tour. I don't know if this is an indictment of it, if it's effective or not. I can just tell you about how it applied to me. When I arrived at the jail, not only did I get to see some people I knew from the hood, I also got to see that they got commissary while us in the juvenile facilities didn't. I also got to see that they got radios while us in the juvenile facilities didn't. So when I was in the juvenile facility, confronted with the question of being tried as an adult, there's no radios and honey buns here. There are over there. Let's go. Send me over. So at 14, I made a decision for myself that would make an impact and have long-lasting effects for both me and the rest of society for the rest of my life. And I weighed myself over, for lack of better words. I rejected the 7-year agreement that 33-year-old Angel would not allow a 14-year-old Angel to mate. Once I got to the adult side, I was now labeled the worst of the worst, right? The juveniles that get tried as adults are the worst. And I was surrounded by the worst of the worst. And as a teenager that's developing his identity, I embraced that identity, did about a year there, got out worse than I went in, with a lot worse friends, a lot more reputation in the hood, a lot more access to doing wrong. Something that any of you who might have studied sociology know that deviance usually comes about when there is an opportunity to learn it and to apply it. And when those two things are not in place, usually people retreat and they get into drug addictions or other things. But committing crime usually comes about. So the jails and the prisons become the university of crime. And we spend about $24,000 a year in Florida to maintain that university and keep those scholarships going in the prison system. Meanwhile, it costs about $21,000 for me to attend the University of Central Florida and be a contributing citizen in our society. Just a side note, something that I learned as I began reflecting on my journey. Got arrested for multiple gang shootings after that, more serious charges. And at 17, I was headed to the penitentiary with a 30-year sentence and a 9th grade education. But on my way there, I was headed with something else. I was headed there with an experience of a father who gave his all to raise me on his own. He was an elderly father. He loved me to death. Literally. He came from Cuba as an immigrant, and he always instilled in me the value of education, not because he had one, but because he didn't have one and knew that the power it had in this society, in this country. And so he always taught me, if you work hard and get an education, you can do great things in this country, Angel. One would think that goes in one ear and out the other, particularly by the life I was leading, but it didn't. It went in one ear and somewhere in some dusty part of my mind. But it came to me when I was sitting in prison, and I was in a GED class, and I thought, I have a life sentence, for lack of better words, to complete this GED. But should I get it? That would make my dad proud. I would have something to show for it. My dad continued to stand by me, even when many of his friends and many people would ask him, why are you still driving yourself crazy? Why are you killing yourself trying to be by this kid? This kid doesn't learn. He's gotten out, gotten worse, and only went back in. But you know, as a father, as his only child, love came before justice for him. Love came before rules. And so, in a sense, he continued to commit himself to loving me. And as a natural human, which, unless you're very sociopathic, most of us eventually will be won over by that. We'll be touched by it. Those of us who come to Christ come to it because we're convicted about the love that he gave us, even while we're crucifying him with our actions daily, right? And so we're motivated and we're afraid, not of a punishment, but of hurting his feelings, of not appreciating his love, right? And so that became the first image of God for me. And through my father's love, I was motivated to get a GED and was very proud to get it. And when I sent it, I got, as a matter of fact, I remember I was in a cell, in confinement for fighting in prison. Mind you, 17 years old, gang-related in the streets, going into prison. In prison, you find your place. As people find their places in the church through denominations, you find your place through ethnicity, neighborhood, and gang relations. Or you become a loner and a victim. And so at 17, I was connected to the gangs in prison, people that knew me, and I went in for, like, in other words, cashed in that check and continued that lifestyle. So I was sitting in a prison cell for a fight at the prison I had just arrived. And I got the GED slid under my door. But I felt very proud that I got a GED. And the beautiful thing about Florida's GED, I don't know if any of you know, but it says high school diploma. So that was a lot more empowering. The only difference is the alma mater is Department of Education. Right? No, the education is where the GED comes from. My alma mater particularly was Department of Corrections. And so with that though, it was a turning point for me. I wanted to give my father something to make him happy. I wanted to thank him. Not do things for him so he could do something for me, but do things for him because of everything he had already done for me. And I'm sure many of us can relate through our faith with Christ in that sense, right? I think that's when we go from an immature spiritual relationship to a mature one. What can you do for me as to you've done so much, what can I do for you? And because God has everything, our challenge then is to do for others. When we see the poor, when we see the homeless, when we see those in need, when we do for them, we've done for God. And so I began growing up. Again, I'm 19 years old. Then 21, I get out. I have a 30-year sentence. That kind of incentivizes me to want to look into my case in terms of reducing my sentence or litigating it. But as many would learn, in prison, you're not incentivized to walk in there. You walk into a law library is walking into a church. It's foreign, you don't know what's going on, and you haven't been here before, so you're ready to go back out. And you leave. And then you resort to playing sports, continuing with the gangs, selling drugs, using drugs, and continuing that lifestyle from the streets in prison. And little do you know that your case then fades away. And by the time that you grow up enough to realize, there might have been some issues that could have been litigated, you've become time barred. And so, fortunately for me, I found another friend from Miami who happened to work in the law library, and he had been tried as an adult. He had a lot of respect, but he had kind of matured. So I still would sag my pants and walk with my little persona. While he had already put up his pants, he prided himself in being professional, and I found some mentors like that. The people that you would think are the worst of the worst and have been in prison the longest are also sometimes the more mature, and they could establish a culture. So he did for me. He said, "Angel, there's a philosophy in prison. It is, if you fight for yourself, we'll fight with you. But if you don't stand up for yourself, we won't stand up with you." And he applied that same idea into law. If you fight your case, I'll help you fight it with you. But if you're not willing to put in the time, I'm not going to do it for you. That's your case, not mine. Unless you're willing to give me a big check, and that's how there's a hustle or a job, and under a black market type of job where that becomes a way of making money in prison, because a lot of people don't commit to fighting their case. And so I took him up on it. I had got my GED, and I saw that he had been in the paralegal program, and I said, "Man, can I get involved in that?" And he's like, "Yeah, you want to?" And I said, "Yeah, I got a dad. He'll pay for the course. I mean, he'll pay, how much is it? Like $35 a month." I'm like, "All right." And I enrolled in it, and I swore I was in a college program, and I was getting a college degree with this college course. It was neither college nor a degree. It was a certificate from some distance education that today would not be available because it has moved on to online provide from services. So today wouldn't have been available, but that was my awareness of what a college education consisted of. But with he vouched for me, I got a job in the law library. I walked into that law library. At first, the librarian didn't want to give me the job as a trainee because I was a 19-year-old jitterbug, is what they're called in Florida. Hothead, troublemaker, impulsive, and usually if we're in adult facilities, serious charges and long sentences to boot. We're very unstable, not the kind of people you want to have there. And so that became something that he had to fight against, and he reminded the guy how he was one of those one time, and how I was in the paralegal program through the mail. And the guy gave me a chance. They hired me, and I walked in my first day at the law library. And as soon as I walked in, we walked through the regular library, the general library. The officers bring us, come in, and the library is ran by the inmates. There's one librarian who has a desk at the top who gets to kind of have a view of everything that's going on. The librarian is a civilian, therefore dressed in civilian clothes. All the inmates obviously in inmate uniform. And as soon as we come in, you continue further, and then at the back is the law library. You go through the door, and there's a few desks there. There is a front desk that separates the people that are visiting from the people that work there, and then the workers have their own professional desk. And so when I got there, I'm like, where do I sit? And they're like, right here, this is your desk. I had never had a desk of my own, much less a professional one. And I'm like, are you serious? Like, this is probably wrong, but okay. I get the desk. They had, I still remember, a coffee pot, and they could make tea. And that was pretty privileged, to say the least, for someone in prison. And mentally I asked, what's the officer? And there wasn't any officer. It was the first time that I felt, one, empowered, and two, entrusted. Now I wanted to live up to that. I didn't want to ruin that for someone else or for myself. I thought I could be a big boy and you could leave me alone, it's okay. And this felt good. And then I learned about law, and it felt really empowering to know that I was helping people who didn't know about law. And it meant that I was learning something that was, for most of us, somewhat esoteric. I was actually getting this, and I didn't think it was that esoteric anymore. And the question then followed, the thought followed, had I known this in society, had I known this in the streets, I wouldn't have said society. Had I known this in the streets, I would have pursued this out there. But I didn't, and it's too late. But is it? Even if I got out, could I be an attorney? And I researched, and in Florida, to say the least, it's an uphill battle. But it's possible, and there was one story I read. And that story was of an individual who had been arrested for trafficking drugs. He was attending FSU. He went to prison. In prison, continued his education while there was still education available in prison. There were Pell Grants available. got out, got his law degree, and got denied from the to take the Florida bar exam. He appealed it, they denied it, and he appealed it again, and the Supreme Court is the court of last resort in this situation. They're going through the litany of facts, and that's how I'm learning about it, and they said we'll be hard-pressed to find someone not go back in, much less to get an education, to contribute, and to show this rehabilitation. Therefore, this person should be allowed to take the bar. That person is still a practicing attorney today in Tallahassee. His story, never met him, but his story gave me a silver lining. And my dad's commitment and love to me gave me the motivation, the desire to want to become educated. As I did that and I learned that I had the ability to do that, I then became empowered and I developed a confidence to continue this education. And I no longer did it for my dad, now I was doing it for myself. I was happy with it, and I told myself, if I ever get out, I want to go to college and I want to become an attorney. I love fighting the system, I love fighting for the underdog, I love keeping the system honest. I love when individuals wouldn't fight against an officer, will come to us instead, and we will file agreements that will correct the issue. And that taught me there were different avenues on how to have your voice heard, how to have your rights respected, other than to fight back. And this was something that was foreign to me, but I was very happy to have learned it. And so I continued educating myself, and what I started learning was that I became addicted to education. I became addicted to the fact that I was able to validate myself with something other than a street reputation. I still remember being taken out with the officers one time to the law library, and they said, we're looking for the law clerks, not the people that have appointments. I said, I work there, I'm a law clerk. And usually they're used to seeing older inmates who've been there 20 or 30 years, not a teenager who seems he just got pulled out of some gang meeting, right? And when they said that, like, they must hire anybody in there. Thankfully they do. That's why I'm there. But more importantly, it was the respect that I had from the older ones, which officers respected, where they respected me as being one of the brighter ones. And a lot of them, I had taught a lot of what they knew. And so I started finding a lot of validation through that. Dreamt of one day getting out and going to college. And eventually my convictions were vacated. I was back in court, and I was able to get a 15-year negotiation with 10 years probation. I take full responsibility and also remorse for my crimes, all of them gang-related, but I know that I could have been on the other side of those shootings. And a lot of times it's not even about the gang members, it's about the family that suffers, because I saw the pain that my dad went through. So I could just imagine the pain that other family members are going through. And even more so is the pain of those who don't get a second chance. Those who are going to be in prison for the rest of their lives, or those who find themselves in the graves or are paralyzed because of gang violence. Right? Those are the ones that are even sadder, because had those youth had more time, they would have matured out of it. That's something that we learn. A lot of juvenile crimes and a lot of juveniles who commit acts, they're usually transitory. And they will eventually have greater potential rehabilitation if finding themselves in the right places. Prison, I don't think it's one of those places. But I was fortunate to find mentors, people that were in prison, that were very literate, that valued education, and because of that, instilled that value in me. My dad's words came back to echo in my mind. If you work hard to get an education, you can do great things in this country. And somehow I still believe that. I began self-educating and dreaming of someday getting out and going to college. Eventually my release date was coming about, and I had to decide if I go back to Miami, I'll be walking into a revolving door and back into prison. My mom has battled a lifelong addiction with drugs. My dad has since passed away. Fortunately, he got to see my sentence reduced, and he was able to pass in peace. But I knew that being on probation, you're held to a higher standard, and that higher standard prevents you from being around other people who might be committing crimes, such as using drugs. And what am I going to turn my mother in? Of course not. But my mother stayed by, and she would buy a book when I needed it. She would send me money for my commissary when she could. And so I didn't want to seem like I was abandoning her or thought I was too good to be with her. And it's hard for her to understand my decisions. And she thought it was a tough decision, but I said, you know what, I'll move away from Miami, but be close enough to where it won't be a burden for her and I to see each other every once in a while. And so, well, where can I move? And having no place to move, I decided, how about a homeless shelter? I watched The Pursuit of Happiness, That inspired me. And more importantly, something else inspired me. As I entertained that idea, I still was wrestling with it. I remember reading this individual during the Lent season. One of the things that he did, and then he continued to do it on weekends every once in a while, was he became homeless intentionally so that he could share in the homeless suffering. And he would beg for money to be able to eat just like a homeless. He would go out there without any money, without any of those resources, so that he can experience that and also earn the credibility of those he's hoping to help. I thought the same thing is what Christ did for us, is that's the message he got. And I said to myself, well, if I get out, I want to one day prove to a lot of my friends who keep telling me, why am I reading books, that I can't use this when I get out in society, that society wouldn't accept them. I want to prove to my friends that it can be done. But if I get out with things given to me, if I get out with a lot of family and resources, it's hard to come back eventually and tell guys, hey, you can do it too. The person, they'll say, yeah, you did it because you had all these things available. But if I do as Jesus did for us, if I humble myself to the least, if I share with everybody at the least common denominator, then it gives me the credibility and the proof, not only that God proves himself strong in our weaknesses, but it also gives me the credibility and proof that if you happen to have family and resources, then you too can do this, and even more so, right? And so that I began wrestling with this idea of taking on a homeless shelter release. And so I wrote to shelters from Fort Lauderdale or Broward all the way to Orlando. Orlando was as far north I was going to go. And I think that's partly because most of my time was in prisons in the north. I visited UF, and I can tell you I would not go there. No critique of UF itself. But man, when you hear those voices that sound just like the officers, there's something chilling about it. That's something personal to me. That's not a critique of people. There's a fault that an experience that I've had to deal with. I just came back from Oxford. And Mississippi, I was at Ole Miss. I was a panelist there, and it was really interesting to learn that Oxford is the most progressive part of Mississippi. It was pretty striking. At any rate, the Salvation of Orlando welcomed me. They had a work program. I had acceptance into drug programs. I was about to feign a drug problem in order to be accepted into a place I could stay at instead of having to go back to Miami. I didn't have one. My goal was to go to school. There isn't any college program for anyone getting out of prison. And so the work program from the Salvation Army was probably the best option I had. I took them up on it. And then I wrote to the local community college. I was even confused because the local community college is Valencia College. And I'm like, where is the Orlando Community College? Right? That's what I'm used to. Mind you, again, I thought my certificate program was being in college and getting a degree. As time went on and I began self-educating, I started learning the difference between going to law school and getting a bachelor's degree. I thought you just went straight into law school. I also learned the difference between an associate's and a bachelor's. Found out that the A goes before the B, so an associate's first, bachelor's later. Still couldn't figure out why they call one an associate's of arts and the other one of science. Thought one had to do with chemistry, the other one with painting and drawing and stuff. Couldn't find a place for myself there. I'm like, what do people that like law do, right? But I began developing that cultural capital that I didn't have in the home. And so I learned Valencia College was the local community college. I wrote to them. And not only to my gratitude of them, but to my surprise, it was being mailed from a correctional facility. And so I knew that probably they don't want me on campus. My image and my window to the world of how society sees me comes through the experience I have with staff and officers. And that's usually not a good one. They remind us how they'll be holding our bunk because we'll be back. They remind us how we can't be trusted. They remind us how, you might be good, but you're the exception. So most of us are not. And that's how society sees us. And you're going to go next door and you're going to get a library card. And you're going to go in there and they're going to have free workshops where you're going to learn how to use a computer. You're going to learn how to do these things. And then I want you to come back next week with a resume and we're going to work on this. I said, okay, thank you. I left there grateful, but broken inside. I remember going, and I'll probably choke up now thinking about it, but I remember going to the back of that building and just crying and saying, I want to go back home. So that experience was important to me because it reminded me how difficult it may be and how individuals will find themselves at a crossroad. And right when things are going to get really great, things are going to look really bad. And if we could make it past that, we'll experience the greatness. Right before Resurrection Sunday, there was a Crucifixion Friday. You thought the stuff they were going through before was bad. The crucifixions was the worst of the worst. I did that, got to the shelter, found myself at the shelter having a challenge. The shelter knew I wanted to enroll in college. They asked me what were my goals. I told them what they are. We had meetings, and they said, well, if you're enrolled in college and you don't have a job, you're going to have to find somewhere else to go. College is all good and dandy, but unfortunately, we're a work program, and you're going to have to find somewhere. You could do that on your own time, but you have to have a job. You can't just have people here trying to go to school and then doing that and not working. And I said, well, I agree with you. The only problem is that I have no work experience as far as I understand it. I'm competing in the 2011 job market. This is right after the 2008-9 crisis, with people who have graduate degrees and can't get jobs. And but I get it. And so I said, you know what? Now I have all the right reasons to leave. I have all the right reasons to say I gave this a try and it hasn't worked. My goal of going to school hasn't panned out. They don't want me to go to school while I'm here. I can't get a job. I was going to locations day after day, and I couldn't get a job. And so I was just doing the rounds. And I went to a fast food place. You hiring? No? All right, thank you. Can I get a card? Name? So I fill in the blanks of who I saw and the establishment I try to get a job at. You have to have at least 5 a day. And as I was doing that, I already had planned out, I'm going back to Miami, and I was excited about it. I was emotionally excited. I finally had somewhere where people know your name. I had somewhere that was like Cheers, right? Somewhere people would embrace me. That people actually would even hold me up. But they would do it for the wrong reason, and they would expect the wrong things from me. I have a reputation there for doing certain things. So if you don't, then you lose that reputation, and you become stigmatized. It's the same as being back in regular society. Or you live up to it, and then you're back in prison. And so somehow I visualized myself back in Miami and then back in the prison. So I didn't know how the middle would happen, but I just knew it was a work in progress to go back in prison. I went to a fast food place called Flippin' Burgers. They said they weren't hired, walked out, and some gentleman ran out and said, hey, you looking for a job? I was like, yeah. He said, come on in. I might be able to fit you into a part-time position. I said, oh my God, you're kidding me. I'm ready to go to Miami. And so I couldn't pass it off. I said, yeah, and I fill out the application. She's like, fill this out and I'll give you a call. And I did. I'm like, well, as soon as, have you been convicted of a felony? Yup. And explain, too long. I'm kidding. I wrote willing to discuss an interview because it's too long. So leave there. I already have the place where I'm going to go stay at in Miami. I'm already preparing to the first of the month to see my probation officer, transfer my probation. And this gentleman gives me a call and says, hey, can you come in for an interview? I said, this guy didn't see the convicted felon part? And I said, all right. I went to see him, and the gentleman says, explain this part to me. And I tell him briefly in the elevator speech what I shared with you all in the last 30 minutes. And he's like, all right, I'm going to give you a shot. I'm like, you gotta be kidding. This is the first job I didn't want that I was actually applying for after such a long time, which I think is something to keep in mind. Keep in mind as I finish this story about my journey, and keep in mind as, you know, a lot of times we could get discouraged to the point that we have learned helplessness, and then after that learned helplessness, we develop a certain identity, a certain routine, and now we don't want to get out of that routine. It's scary, and it's going against now our new goals. And so he gives me the job. Now I said, well, it's a part-time job. They won't accept it at the shelter. They want full-time employment. So I go there, but I have to make a case for myself. I have to stay legitimate in front of God. I have to at least give it a fight. And God's going to challenge me in that sense. And so I tell them, listen, this is a job. I can enroll now. And they said, yeah, that's part-time. I have to talk to the manager. And the assistant manager happened to have been an ex-correctional officer. You know, and I, an ex-convict. Usually strange bedfellows now. But what allowed him to make great discernment was his experience. And he was able to discern between someone who was really trying to do right and had the potential to continue doing right with everybody else. And instead of just rubber stabbing me and treating me like part of a herd, he was willing to make the extra effort, one, to look at individuals. It's a lot easier to treat a herd as a herd than to treat it as individuals. So that's the reason we do it. It's easier, right? It's a heuristic. But then two, to take a risk. When he vouches for me, he's putting his credibility on the line. But I think something that I've come to learn is that his risk, at worst, just makes him have made a bad choice. Right? So that becomes difficult. I say that because now I'm in a position where I can vouch for others. But my risk, when I vouch for someone else, makes me to be in conspiracy with the person who did something wrong. So it makes it a lot harder for me. So people who are in a position to take those risks should, right? And understand that they have the ability, and that's the difference between a manager and a leader. A manager would be courageous in taking a risk for the right reasons. And so he vouched for me, and he said, we need to keep this kid, and he's doing the right thing. And so they took his word, they're like, okay. And with that, I enrolled at Valencia. When I got to Valencia, I couldn't get financial aid because of my convictions. And so I had to, because I didn't register with Selective Service. So I had to show, I looked up the law, and it showed that if you've been incarcerated through the period, you don't have to register, because you can't. I can't register from prison. And so I brought my prison record, and the person that dealt with me was shocked that a student had actually did all this research, right? But that was just the legal experiences that I had and the legal knowledge I had. And as I was sitting there, I told her, I'm interested in work study. I would love to work in an office environment. This, to me, I know reminded me of working in a law library, working in education. And can I? And she's like, yeah, you qualify. Then I get a call back. Little did I know, I was speaking to the manager. And the manager, in her mind, immediately when she saw me print out the rules and regulations of federal aid, and my interest in being a work study, said, I'm hiring him. This is with my prison record in front of her. So I got hired at Valencia. I was able to leave flipping burgers, and that was the literal name of it. And it closed down right after this. Like, yeah, it's like I put it there just so I could get that job. The owner, Levon, before I left, he's like, I want to thank you, Angel. He's like, thank me for what? He's like, thank you for proving me wrong. I had doubts, but you proved me wrong. You know, in a million years, I could tell people can change or can't change, but you gave me a real life example, right? I think that's what God did for us. Jesus proved us wrong, that God does love us to the point that he's not just going to tell you to do right, he's going to do right for you. And hopefully motivate you to do right too. So I kept that in mind, got my first job, became a financial aid specialist at Valencia, walking on eggshells, on a don't ask, don't tell type of mentality. I was afraid of who would out me and then out my manager. And I remember at my 6-month review being asked by my manager, hey, do you have any questions? You've done great. Everybody's excited about you. The district office always talks about you like our best work study. You know more than you need to know. You're taking initiative. You're great. I said, yeah, who knows about my past and how can it be used against you? And she said, why? I don't know who knows. Maybe this person and that person. I said, I asked because when conversations always start is, I learned something about being homeless is the moment people found out I was in a shelter, I would ask people, drop me off at Publix in downtown so I can walk, and I'll walk myself to the shelter. But the question that's usually asked is not even the fact of being in the shelter, is how come? And then I would have to either tell the whole story or just let their minds run wild and create worse stories. What bridge did you burn? Who did you hurt? How did you get yourself in this situation? And so I told her that that's been a challenge, so I've kept it to myself, and it feels like I'm walking in a don't ask, don't tell environment where I'm afraid that I'll be outed. And she said, Angel, I made this decision to hire you. I knew your record. You were honest with me, and I don't give a darn who says it. Who knows? I'm willing to fight for this decision. I'm willing to fight for you. It caused me to tear up, and it removed a lot of the weight that was on me. But still, I didn't want to take advantage of that, and I still was reserved. Later on, as an honor student, I was invited to speak, to be part of the audience with students as an honor student when the Second Lady of the United States came to Valencia, Dr. Jill Biden. And they had a panel, and they left it open for questions, and I knew I had watched enough of PBS and stuff, and CNN, where they have these talking figureheads, and then they leave it to when they come to the school, and then they ask the people in the audience if they have questions. So I had a question, and I felt I had a responsibility now that I was in a place that usually individuals like me are not at. I need to speak for somebody. What group am I speaking for? And I still wasn't courageous enough to speak for felons, but I was courageous enough to speak for homeless students. And so there's a waiver in Florida that if a person is homeless, they get their tuition waived. That way they can use their financial aid for hopefully establishing themselves and creating a safety net that would allow them to continue on the next semester and take some of that worry about off their minds. That's usually one of the reasons people don't finish a semester, is because they're not even sure if they're going to continue the following one. And so when they were asked, anybody has any questions, I raised my hand. And I said, I just briefly shared how I'm an honor student with a 4.0 in a shelter. And I said most of that is because I am on a homeless tuition waiver, and I'm able to use my financial aid to create a safety net that alleviates any worries about where I'm going to be next semester, should I be asked to leave the shelter, because it has a timeline where in which I could be there. And it grabbed a lot of people's attention. I said, this is a state-oriented policy. Can it be looked at as for a national policy? Considering that when I've traveled to other states, other friends would ask me, what do I tell homeless students when I get back to my college? And I tell them about the tuition waiver. I'm like, they don't have it at your state, never mind. And so I brought that up, grabbed the president's attention of Valencia, grabbed the provost's attention of UCF after that. But then there was an advisor who was with me, and as soon as the thing ended, he went up to the president and said, oh, you think he's amazing? You ain't heard nothing yet. The man just did 12 years in prison. I had been outed. I never got to come out. I didn't know how to respond. I was waiting for Secret Service to escort me out. And just waited. And to my surprise, the president asked me to come over, gave me a hug, said, you just got out of prison, Angel, and you're doing these things. I said, yeah. He's like, we need to have lunch. And at that moment, a weight melted off my back, because I felt like not only that I had a place to go at Valencia, I had a place that, like I say, didn't just accept me, but embraced me. And it was coming from the leadership down. That advisor went up to the president of the school and said the things he said because he knew his leadership. He knew the culture. He knew I would be someone that would be embraced, not outcasted. And so from that point forward, I owned my reality, but it came with the help of a lot of people. It came with the embracing from a lot of people. And with that, I've been able to help other people. Now, my testimony now has become more public, and individuals now come privately to talk to me, and I'm able to mentor sometimes individuals. The hardest thing is that because I've achieved what I have in this very unique journey, everybody's journey is unique. One looks at a cookie cutter solution, now how I can fix everybody else's problems. But nonetheless, it came because those individuals embraced me. And so I looked back at my journey, and I was sitting in the classroom, and in that classroom I was writing a narrative essay. And an essay was supposed to narrate some period in your life. And I decided I'm going to narrate from the moment I got out of prison to the day I was sitting in that classroom. And as I began narrating, the thesis that emerged from that essay, the message that emerged from that essay, which then became the title of the essay, is that when will to succeed is finally met by another person's compassionate support, that's when success becomes inevitable. Compassionate support without the drive to succeed makes success almost impossible. And likewise, the will to succeed without a compassionate support makes success almost impossible. That came because many people were patting me on the back saying, you did it because you worked hard. And I felt like if you knew Angel, who couldn't get a job and was ready to go back to Miami, and would have went back to Miami and got back to prison, you probably would have said, I didn't succeed because I didn't try hard enough. So every time that I was being celebrated, other people were being indicted. And I don't think it spoke to the truth of how much I wanted to succeed. It didn't speak to the truth of the emotional pain and loneliness I was suffering. And yet I was fortunate to find individuals along the way when I was at those forks in the road that gave me those opportunities. I don't find that gentleman that gives me that job, I'm back in Miami. The story is different, and people would have said, he doesn't have the potential to do right in society. Thankfully, I have this story to prove them wrong. And so we started off talking about faith without works is dead, right? And works that don't derive from grace is dead. And that logic, that argument, that a lifelong argument that has divided many of us in the church, what comes faith first, or what is more important, faith or works? A lot of times we could all agree that we could look at faith and works as being a scissor with two blades. Neither one cuts the page on its own. but together they get the job done. The same thing is something that I learned in my journey, that one person's will to succeed is not enough. Another person's compassion and support is not enough, but together they make success possible. So I hope, and I challenge you all to keep that in mind. Think of all the leaders that I ran into in my journey, from a manager who is little known outside of the college, to an owner of an establishment whose business failed in that area, to the president of the school who embraced me and also set a culture for others under him to also embrace me. That it is each one of those individuals that made a lot of my story and my commitment to do right meaningful. Or that lady that didn't just walk around and said, I changed this, come back some other day, but rather challenge me to go into the library and get a library card. I would have never known about that. It is each one of these individuals that played a significant role in my journey. No doubt, I have a commitment, I have a responsibility to commit myself. And that is my challenge to guys and girls that are in prison, that are coming out. They have a challenge, they have a responsibility to commit themselves, to have the will to succeed. And if so, they're going to encounter people like you all who are going to embrace them, not just accept them. Thank you.
For some Q&A, can we maybe do 10 minutes worth? Okay, there are so many more things. He only got you to Valencia, and now Angel is in his 4th year of college. He's at UCF, and Angel, what's your GPA?
Unfortunately, 4.0. Fortunately because of what it is. Unfortunately because it drives you crazy with that inevitable B. It's like an athlete who's been on a winning streak. You know, that pressure of when is the next loss. I tell people, now ask me how's my health, right? And that hasn't been very good. So I've kind of now tried to work my way back from that. And I'm a legal studies student. I'm a political science student. I'm going to law school with God's will, and I'm going to be a social justice advocate. But I have a passion for social psychology because of the understanding it gives me about myself, those like me, and it helps me understand how humans, put in different situations, act differently. A lot of these kids that are in the hood, you take them out of there and you raise them in Cambridge, at Harvard, and they'll be stellar students. You get a lot of these kids that are in fraternities right now at the university, and as they were growing up, you put them in the hood and they would be gang members, right? The same drive internally is being chased, but by sometimes legitimate or illegitimate means. And so with that, I say that because I've been overcompensating, I noticed, almost to the point that it's unhealthy. Because I have to overcompensate, right? I developed an incredible resume as a criminal, as a convict, as a gang member, as a teenager. Someone mentioned that they had Googled me, that I had a lot of videos. And I said, yeah, I noticed that I subconsciously or maybe indirectly, I was trying to overcompensate for the negative Google searches that would have popped up. Now it takes you 3 or 4 pages before you get somewhere negative. Everything at the beginning is positive. It's been a positive result. But I've been trying to calm down, and I encourage the young individuals here to be okay with the mistakes, but do your best. Commit yourself to do your best. But at the end of the day, don't lose your peace. Sometimes we get too focused. What's your GPA? What's your credit score? It's all number oriented. How about what are you? How are you? And I think that unfortunately is not what law schools are looking at when you first apply. The truth is, somebody asked me how I've gotten employment, and the truth is that I got employed before I ever applied. Most of the things that I've applied to, I get turned down most of the times. Even inside the schools where I do well, sometimes I get turned down. It is usually when I am met before I apply that I'm usually accepted and welcomed. And so that's one of the reasons I'll be traveling to some of these schools, because I have friends there. I'm a Cook Scholar, which it's the most prestigious scholarship for transfer students. So we have scholars, most of the scholars are at all top schools in the nation, a lot of the Ivies, and at Stanford and Berkeley. So I'll be traveling to New York to meet some of the faculty who have heard so much about me but have yet to meet me, and they want to meet me. And the reason I'm doing that, unfortunately, is because I have to meet them before I apply to them. Sometimes we just get measured by the paper and the numbers. But any questions, please? Yes, ma'am. And I'll repeat the question just so that it can be.
If this is personal, you don't have to answer it, of course.
Sure.
But I'm wondering if you had been able to have your civil rights restored.
I'm glad you asked that. I try to make my talks and the moments I go somewhere either personal and for personal reasons. And when I'm in a church, I like to talk about how God's example in Christ and His love towards me and my dad's love towards me made a difference in my life. So I try to focus on that. We have petitions here, and that's very important. My research thesis right now, it's on disenfranchisement of felons in Florida. To me, it's the vote is our way of being able, one, to say that we're part of a system, and two, to express ourselves. Remember we talked about the grievances? I'm able to file a grievance. I have an avenue. In the political system, our avenue to express our discontent is through voting. And no, I haven't had my civil rights restored. And to make matters worse, the Florida bar ties the possibility to take the bar to the restoration of rights. For a long time, recently they decoupled it, but employment was tied to that. And so I haven't had it. We have petitions here. I'm looking to see, even if it wouldn't restore my rights because my crimes are violent, they're gang shootings, to restore at the very least the rights automatically of non-violent felons. Also, it talks about the problem with justice by geography. If I was convicted in another state, the moment that I finished my sentence, I would have my rights restored. But because I'm convicted in this state, I am now permanently disenfranchised and forever a second-class citizen until I bow before the King, that is giving clemency, and hopefully discretionally have them approve it. I still remember hearing one of the governors when they opened the meeting is like, first we want you to know you have no right, we don't have any president to follow, and we could deny you this without giving you an explanation. Now tell us why we should give you your rights back. And I'm saying to myself, that's pretty interesting when, liberty is almost meaningless without the franchise. And when a person has completed their sentence, we have said they're free. So let them be free indeed. But no, I haven't had my rights back. And anybody who would like to support that movement, afterwards there's a petition here to sign, and we'll be taking it tomorrow to those individuals that are leading the cause on that matter. Yes.
I was just going to ask you if you had your faith before you went to prison, or if that was found in prison.
Both. So, no, I didn't have a faith before I went to prison, but in prison I actually lost faith. So I was not atheist, I was anti-theist. I was like against anything that's God. Part of the reason as a teenager I had this relationship with God, do this for me and I'll do that. Anybody heard of C.S. Lewis? An amazing writer. In it, he talks about how even us as grown adults begin our relationship with God like that. And as a father, he entertains it and uses it to prove himself to us. Yeah, you did that and I did that. And we look at Ecclesiastics, don't promise because, don't be late in fulfilling it. A lot of times we'll fail. And that's part of the message of the gospel, is that we could never live up to the standards. We start off with knowing what God's standard is, and then we fail. Right? And then we ask God, if you do this, I'll try to meet this standard. And He'll do it, and then we'll fail. And after you've fallen enough, and you're broken, you're like, you know what, God, I'm not promising anymore. If you do something for me, I appreciate it. If not, it's okay, you've done enough. I'm just going to try to do it the best I can, and just commit myself to you. And so when I first went to prison, I remember making a promise that I'll never use a gun again. When I was in the 15-year-old doing time in the county jail, I'll never use a gun again, and I have a lot of caveats. Except if someone is hurting my family, or there's a thing, and here's a 15-year-old creating this contract with God, for lack of better words. Long story short, I broke that promise 6-7 months into being out, and it's really hard to live life in the hood and not have a gun when people are still having guns. It's great that I changed, but they haven't, and they could care less about it. And so I remember breaking the promise, and the very next day I went to jail. I got arrested, and I didn't get arrested for that. And to me, it was like a conviction of of God's existence in my life, and I understood it through Christ. Here's the catch: that if God was right and God is true, then I'm totally wrong. And I was mad, and I hated that, and so I got to the point where I wanted to deny the existence of God. I looked for every rational way of denying the existence of God, because by doing so, it alleviated my conscience. Like I said, if God is right, then I'm wrong, so let's deny God. And in fact, that belief in God is just a manipulation by the government, and I went all out against it. Which, in a way, finally when I was broken, And I finally surrendered, and I said, you know what? And I was denied like my second appeal. I was sitting in a shower, crying by myself. And I said, you know, I don't know if God exists, and if it doesn't exist, God Father, I don't understand this Trinity thing. If worshiping Christ is idolatry, I don't know. But you allow Christ to prove himself to me in this way, and you're going to have to figure this out when I get up there. There isn't up there. Because it came to me, who helped you? Who's been with you when I was broken? And it came, I have. And it was more of a conscious discussion, personal, mental discussion. And it was God, okay. So I surrendered. I said, listen, I don't know if this is right or wrong. Christ proved himself to me, God. You have to figure out, if you are not through Christ, I don't know what's going on. But I don't want anything no more. I'm not going to make any more promises. Forgive me for all the promises I broke. I'm not making any promises. Just let my dad pass in peace. He's not going to live to see me get out. He doesn't deserve this. And it was his love. So love pushed me eventually there. And the love to want to see him not have the pain that he was going through. And the reality that I was going to do this sentence, this 30-year sentence. And I said, if I have to do 30, if I have to do 40, whatever, I'll do it. Thankfully, I could do that, and I have a lot of friends that are not getting out. And once I surrendered in that way, is when my faith in Christ grew, is when I began to understand the mystery of the Trinity, is when I began to have my faith. And so for a very long time in prison, I became anti-theist rather than a believer in God. But because God proved himself, eventually it came back around. And I became a fervent believer in Christ. A humble one too, because I still mess up all the time. But thankfully my mess ups are not the same as the ones from before. C.S. Lewis says, you know, you compare one Christian with another Christian, and you say, oh, look at this Christian, he smokes, he does this. Look at this atheist who's so upright. And he says, you're comparing apples and oranges. That's the wrong measure. Show me that person who's a Christian now, and show me who they were before they were Christians. And have they become better? That's a better measure.
I have a question for you, Angel. Okay, I'm sorry.
I remember meeting you when we were with Desmond.
So I get the microphone, so I get to say a couple of things here very quickly. Angel's correct. I'm not sure he really remembers me, but I remember him.
Yeah.
But he met Faith in Florida Symposium, which was about 3 years ago. And Angel's presentation tonight is just so winsome and engaging and endearing. You should hear him speak before a congregation of about 1,500 people, many of them undocumented individuals and political candidates, Charlie Crist and others there. There's a passion there that can light up the room. And so hopefully you'll get to hear him speak in an occasion like that. A couple things. So Angel, the study of law is an honorable profession, and you can do good things there. But I'm going to suggest to you that the study of theology and ministry might be a pathway for you in the future as well. So always keep that door open. You never know.
It worked for Dan.
You've got some gifts here and on the hand on your shoulder that might be very powerful. Another thing is, I don't know if some of you have just experienced